Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, welcome back to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be going down through some bust-proof picks, some players that I just think wherever you're getting them, and as long as you're not reaching a couple rounds for these guys, you're just not going to be disappointed with them. This is always the assumption that these players are not traded mid-season. These players are obviously not injured in any major ways, right? We're assuming that if all these players play 16 games, which not every single player is going to, but at least the ones I talk about in this video, I really do think that it's really hard for them to bust for you. Now, most of these players and all the ones that I talk in this video are not going to be your first and second round picks. If I came on this video and told you Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, and Ezekiel Elliott, there's my bust-free players of the year, everybody would unsubscribe, right? That's just phony. So I think all the players that I'm going to talk about today are going in round 4 or later as of the recording of this video. And I think the earliest player is going at like the end of round 4, and then it's a late round player, and then it's like a middle 6th, 7th round type of player as well. So we'll go through those. I have 2 honorable mentions. Appreciate you all being here. As always, hit the like button right now for me real quickly. We're getting into the heart of the season right now. It's getting very, very interesting. A month into the season, we'll see. Hopefully, fingers crossed, everything starts on time. But a lot of these videos are going to continue to pick up a ton of viewership as the season gets closer. So I would just ask you if you could hit the like button and the big one, hitting the subscribe button. Big old animation pops up on the screen. If you hit the subscribe button within the video, YouTube says, let me show this to more people because these people are subscribing with him. They must like the content and at least respect his opinion. And that notification bell lets you know when I'm dropping videos so you don't miss out on some huge videos that might be the decision between you choosing a bust and somebody that you need to must draft in some of my upcoming videos. So appreciate y'all being here. On the screen behind me is the Supreme Draft Guide. It's at least the landing page for the Supreme Draft Guide where you're going to get a ton of stuff. It's $10 still, just thanks to Monkey Knife Fight. They said that they'll extend the offer a little bit longer. So get in there right now because it's 66% off thanks to Monkey Knife Fight. All the information that you need to know for your draft is going to be in the Supreme Draft Guide. All the information you need to know on how to get it for $10 linked down below. That'll take you to a video for 1 minute of me explaining how you do it. So it's just $10 thanks to Monkey Knife Fight. Everything in here, rankings, tiers, player profiles, key stats. You see all the premium analysis, top 150s. So be sure to check all of that out. It is linked down below. So without further ado, let's get into our first player of the day. Like and subscribe as we hop on into this. The first bust-proof player of 2020, as long as the player stays healthy, which he's been able to do the last 2 seasons, playing 32 of his past 32 games. Jarvis Landry. Now, he did leave a game last year. It looked like it might be something major. Jarvis Landry came right back the next week. Jarvis Landry, who, although Odell Beckham Jr. was with this team yesterday, was the #1 receiver statistically, accounting-wise, and actually productivity-wise on the Cleveland Browns last year. So Jarvis Landry. What did Jarvis Landry do in 2019? Where is he currently going? What is the value that we're getting out of this guy, Sal? Well, he's currently going as the 69th player off the board. It's very nice to see him going there at wide receiver 29. He's currently my wide receiver 28, 29. I'm pretty much where consensus is on him, but the floor that you have on him compared to some other guys around him is just so good. Like AJ Green's around him. I'm not totally against AJ Green, but again, there's some uncertainty there. You have guys like Devontae Parker, who popped off last year, but potential QB situation this year. Preston Williams coming back. Still some uncertainty there. Jarvis Landry, I look at it, sure, Odell might improve a little bit, might get a little bit more efficient, but in general, the offensive line might get more efficient. Maybe they go some more run heavy with Kevin Stefanski and an improved offensive line. But when I look at Jarvis Landry, I don't need him to do what he did last year. If he does what he does last year, yeah, he's obviously a top 15 wide receiver, top 12 wide receiver for me. I need him to just do what he does on average in his career. And based on last year, it seems like he's nowhere near a cliff in his career, and he's just 27 years old. He's going to be around 27, 28. He'll turn a couple months into the season. That's very good. Right now, he's about 27 and a half years old as I record this video, and even doing that as a 27-year-old, 26-and-a-half-year-old last year, he played on 95% of the snaps, didn't miss a game, caught 83 balls for over 1,150 yards and 6 touchdowns on 138 targets. That amounted out to being a 26.6% target share, led the team. He was top 10 in the NFL in receiving yards, in yards after the catch, in red zone receptions, in target share, in targets in general, in red zone target share, and then he was 12th in receptions. So obviously had a huge season last year. Staying healthy is always going to help with that. Being young, right? I mean, Jarvis Landry, we think about him on the Dolphins. Years ago, he was on the Dolphins and he was still producing, but he's only 27 years old. This guy still has 4 to 5 more years of being a good wide receiver in this league, maybe even more than that based on the role that he plays. And it wasn't just these pop-off weeks for 40 points and then do nothing, right? That's not the style of play that Jarvis Landry is. It was consistency. I mean, let's just look at week 8 on, and I'll really quickly tell you his point total. Starting at week 8, 11.5, 17.1, 24.7, 14.3, 36.8, there's a dagger, big one, finished second that week, 13.6, 11.6, 7.3, 14.4, 16.2. You could could pretty much rely on this guy to, on average, pick you up like 16 fantasy points a week from week 8 on last year. Okay, you want me to go even higher? Week 4, 24.7. Week 5, 11.5. I mean, this is just the definition of a guy who's going in there, again, 12th in receptions, eating it up for PPR points. You have to rely on him, or you're pretty much getting every single week out of him like a 5 or 6 catch game. And last year, you really saw him attack downfield more often than we're used to seeing out of Jarvis Landry. Last year, you really saw his red zone role come on 28% more often than we're used to seeing from Jarvis Landry. So those things were good to see because he started to have a connection with the man on the screen right now in Baker Mayfield, who was not good last year and might actually be coming into a season that's a prove-it year for Baker. If you don't do something here in your 3rd year, after all the talent around you, after the improved offensive line, after we've now changed your coach for the 3rd time since you've been here, things are going to start to point back to you. Now, Baker last year threw the 10th most times per game in the NFL. He had the 3rd worst protection, which was the big thing. We'll talk about the improvements they made in a second, but this is where it gets bad. He threw for 3,800 yards and 22 touchdowns. That was very mediocre, but was less than mediocre 34th amongst 32 starting teams, so 34th because of some backups coming in true completion percentage, 35th when he had a clean pocket, and 50th in red zone completion percentage. So he was just deteriorating even worse when he had time to throw, and it got even worse when the pressure was on in the red zone where big plays had to be made. Now, as you can see on the screen right now, you can see some of the things that the Browns did in the offseason. The biggest thing they did for their skill position was get Austin Hooper, and now you have David Njoku wanting to be traded away, so we'll see what happens with that. If Njoku is traded away by the time of this recording, I'm recording this probably about 10 to 14 days before because I'm going to be traveling in August, beginning of August. If he's traded, then obviously I just didn't have that news in time. If he is indeed traded, then it does help Landry. It's mainly going to help Austin Hooper more. I expect him to play 2 tight end sets. So Harrison Bryant, who they took in the 4th round, as you can see to the right in the NFL draft, would probably get the biggest bump in overall playing time and role change. So although it might help Hooper just see a little bit more targets, I actually think it would help Harrison Bryant the most. The biggest thing for this team in general was the fact that they got Jack Conklin, Tennessee's offensive lineman, and they took Jedrick Willis in the 1st round of the draft. So 2 big offensive line pieces to help what was the 3rd worst protection rate last year for Baker. Now, Jarvis Landry succeeded even with that, right? But if you see Baker now throwing for, instead of 3,800 yards, maybe he hits like the 4,400 yard mark. He's a little bit more efficient. The team's efficient in general. You see maybe Jarvis Landry can get an 8 touchdown season. So I don't know if he repeats what he did last year, but that's the thing. We don't need him to repeat it based on him going 69th overall right now. You can see me propping up the target competition here. OBJ, Austin Hooper, Kareem Hunt, Tywan Taylor, Damian Ratley, David Njoku if he's still there. So not a ton of target competition. I expect, and I'm very big on a bounce back season, and that's going to be in a future video for Odell Beckham Jr. So I expect that to happen this year. I think it cuts into Jarvis Landry just naturally there a little bit, but nothing major. I would still expect Jarvis Landry to be a 1,000-yard receiver. I would still expect Jarvis Landry to be a 5 to 6 to 7 touchdown receiver, and at that draft capital, it's a very good spot. Next up is Matthew Stafford, Detroit Lions quarterback, and we don't really talk about quarterbacks all that often on this show unless it's like a specific quarterback value or rankings video. And to be honest with you, SEO-wise, search engine optimization, not a lot of people are searching for their quarterback options, right? Quarterback is right now, to me at least, pretty obvious that if you're somebody who likes taking quarterbacks early, go ahead and get them. I'm not, at least in redraft formats for most of them. If it's not a 2 QB league or Superflex, I'm fine waiting really late. And I think there's 2 guys who are really fine to wait on. Matt Ryan and Matthew Stafford stand out. Now, I think there's a lot of guys down there, right? Cam Newton, Carson Wentz. There's guys that I can name that I'm fine getting to. Daniel Jones, like if they're my starting quarterback, I'm okay with that. And the list kind of goes on and on at that point. But I do think that Matt Ryan's going around a round or 2, 20 picks ahead of Matt Stafford. So instead of putting him on this list, I think Matthew Stafford does stand out where he's going as just kind of a bust-proof play. He's going as the 107th player off the board, the QB 13. Matthew Stafford's easily a top 10 QB for me personally, and he was doing it last year before getting injured. He averaged 36.4 attempts per game. He threw for 312 yards per game and 19 total touchdowns, 6.5% rate, which was very good. That was in half the games last year. If you stretch that out to a full season, he would have ended up with 4,998 yards and 38 touchdowns. He would have been first in touchdown passes and 3rd in yards. He was 2nd only behind Jameis Winston in yards per game. He was 6th in true passer rating. He was 4th in fantasy points per game at 20.8 per contest for quarterbacks, and he was 5th in fantasy points per dropback. How is this the QB 13? He had a back injury last year. I had somebody reach out to my mentions like a month ago and say, hey, but Matthew Stafford's injury prone. Matthew Stafford was one of the most durable quarterbacks in the entire NFL, and then he hurts his back, sure. But he's played through injuries. He just doesn't miss games. Last year, back injury. It's said to be healed right now, so I'm not going to be as concerned about it. His offensive line last year ranked 21st in pass blocking when he was out there and 25th in protection rate at only 80.5%. So that's not good. This is an offensive line that actually improved the year before, but they ended up losing Graham Glasgow. Graham Glasgow, they lost to free agency. They did sign Vate, who's a borderline top 10 offensive lineman coming into this year, at least for them. Their offensive line mainly just took a big step back last year because of some injuries. It's going to maybe be a balancing act this year. They'll get a guy in Frank Ragnow back who took a big step forward last year. They're going to lose Graham Glasgow, so that's not great. And then they'll get Vontae, so maybe that'll kind of cushion the blow a little bit for them. Now you can see what else they did in the offseason. Not a lot to really help Matthew Stafford. Hopefully the offensive line improvements from Vontae did. Hopefully some of the guards that they took, Jonah Jackson and Logan Steinberg in the NFL draft, as you can see. Hopefully that helps. Main offensive weapon that they added was DeAndre Swift in the draft, who I think will be a pretty key role in this offense. Maybe Jason Huntley sees the field, a fifth-round running back who has some pedigree and upside, at least from the college he was coming out of. But for the most part, they added Geronimo Allison, a slot receiver, Jeremy Davis. These are guys that Allison might push Danny Amendola out of the slot. Amendola has been known to get injured pretty much every single season that he's been in the NFL, so maybe Allison gets some work, but he was pretty bad at separating with the division rival, the Packers, last year. Stafford's mainly going to rely on the guys that you know. Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay on the outside, one of the most underrated wide receiver duos in the league, and then TJ Hawkinson, who's just going to be an absolute monster at some point in the NFL, and why not his second year after battling through injuries towards the end of last year. Let's look at what the passing game options are going to be for Matthew Stafford here. You can see Kenny Golladay, a guy who went last year for right around 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns. For me, he's a huge wide receiver in this offense that I just love the guy. Contested catch. Doesn't matter if he's playing with David Blau last year. Doesn't matter who he's playing with. He's just going to dominate, right? Jeff Driscoll, he ends up still being a top 10 wide receiver, and I have him easily there this year in my rankings. Marvin Jones, a guy who, when he's healthy, is actually producing better than Kenny Golladay over the last 16 games when both have been healthy. Now, obviously, that's a little bit skewed because Marvin Jones has had his experience, and during that last 16 games is really when Kenny Golladay started to break out, so you're getting a couple of not so much breakout games before that. But obviously, Marvin Jones last year had around 800 yards and 9 touchdowns, and that was missing 3 games on a 20% target share. Danny Amendola and Allison, like I said, they're going to be out of the slot. And TJ Hawkinson, who in his rookie year, after missing 4 games, just playing in 12, had 32 receptions. He saw 14.1% target share, which ended up being 59 targets, 367 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was probably on pace to see a little over 500 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns, which is very good for a rookie tight end. And this might be the breakout year for him. So the former first-round pick in Matthew Stafford last year, if you own the piece of him before his injury, this is what he did in the weeks that he played. 27.6 fantasy points, 15.1, 12.1, 23.4, 28.6, 23.4, 24.8. I mean, his last 3 weeks before starting with injury, he finished as the quarterback 3, 6, 4. I mean, he finished as the quarterback 6 or better 5 times out of his 8 starts as a quarterback. That is elite. And another time he finishes as QB 15, QB 20. He only finished outside the top 20 one time in those 8 weeks. 5 times inside the top 6. He was producing as a QB1 pretty much week in and week out on average for you. Matthew Stafford is a guy that going as quarterback 13, going outside the top 100 picks, yeah, sure. In your 11-person drafts, why are you not taking him in the 9th, the 10th round as your QB1, where you're getting a QB1 at that point, even though people aren't seeing him as that? Matthew Stafford is bust-proof for me because even if he's going to finish as QB12 or QB13, that's exactly where you're drafting him. So you're drafting him at his floor when his ceiling is honestly top 3 QB. Before we move on to our final player, before our honorable mentions, please do hit that like button real quick. Take a second of your time, bottom right-hand corner, big old subscribe button pops up. Tap that for me one time and hit the little notification bell. All those things really do help these videos reach more people, as I assume we're going to really start to reach a lot more people. And also leave a comment down below. Who is a player that comes to mind when I say bust-proof players for 2020? Who's somebody that you think is just bust-proof no matter what they're going to pay off for you? And don't tell me Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey. Give me somebody after the first couple of rounds. Let me know down below in the comment section. Check out that Supreme Draft Guide. I'm telling you, $10. It's going to be the steal of your lifetime. I've been spending months on this thing. Monkey Knife Fight is on. I had a battle for another couple of weeks. We're going to be getting it sponsored, so I don't know when that's going to end, but go ahead and get it in right now before it does end. So it's going to be linked down below. Let's get into our final player now. How many times do I have to talk about Robert Woods until you guys start drafting him? Now, maybe you are, but he's still going as wide receiver 18 overall. He's gone from being like the wide receiver 22 taken. He's been my wide receiver 12 for the past 2 months in my rankings. Like, I haven't moved the guy at all. I moved him before that from like 16 to 12. He's well ahead of Cooper Kupp for me, even though in overall ADP, he's going well behind Cooper Kupp, like 4 to 5 picks behind him. Right now, Robert Woods is my wide receiver 12, is going off the board as the 45th overall player. That's fine, but wide receiver 18, no, there's just like, maybe you can argue with 1 or 2 of the guys going ahead of him, but some of those guys, no shot. Robert Woods last year and playing in 15 games, going for 93% of the snaps, 90 receptions for over 1,100 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's due to come up. 140 targets, saw a 23.3% target share. So very good overall for Robert Woods. That's 2 straight years with 130 plus targets. Now there's no more Brandon Cooks. You do like to see this. Arguably, in my opinion, he's going to be the number 1 receiver in this offense. And if they go from playing their like 8% of 12 personnel that they played 2 years ago to 21% that they played last year, even if they just go up a little bit, like they said they want to 25%, even if they stay at 20 or 21%, it has to be helping Robert Woods the most over another guy who's arguably the other 1A, 1B in this offense in Cooper Kupp. And the main reason why is because Robert Woods is primarily an outside receiver. Although he played 35% of his snaps in the slot, and we love to see that slot usage for wide receivers that are good, they can just do so much more damage in the middle of the field where they can use either side of the field field against a worse cornerback. Even though we like to see that, we like to see that he can dominate on the outside when they just go to 2 tight end sets, 12 personnel, no slot receiver. That means you have 2 tight ends on the field in line, or I guess they can come off the line, and also 2 wide receivers on the outside with a running back in the backfield. So when that happens, yeah, it's going to be bad for Cooper Kupp because he's mainly a slot wide receiver his whole career. So he's either A, coming off the field and they're putting Josh Reynolds or the rookie Van Jefferson on the field with Robert Woods there as the second wide receiver, or B, Cooper Kupp's going on the outside where he's more inexperienced and he struggles to beat press coverage. Last year, the rankings for Robert Woods: 6th in NFL in route runs, 8th in targets, 8th in receptions, 2nd in yak. That's elite. We like to see that he can do it after the catch. 560 total yards after the catch, 2nd in the NFL, I believe only behind Chris Godwin. He had 15.5 fantasy points per game, that 35% slot usage. And again, he saw just 2 receiving touchdowns. One of his touchdowns last year was rushing. So 2 receiving touchdowns on 140 targets. Now, he's never been the guy to score a ton of touchdowns, especially in this offense. He only saw a 13.9% target share, but you would expect more than 2 receiving touchdowns even on that, right? If you're going to end up seeing like 12 red zone receptions, you would expect that 3 or 4 of them start to become touchdowns. So there's definitely the case for regression here. And last year, if you just give Robert Woods 2 more touchdowns, he finishes as the wide receiver 7. Now, you can't just throw those stats in there, but again, 140 targets, it's hard to see only another 2 touchdown season coming. Even if you give him what he had the year before that, he's seen 130 plus targets in back-to-back years. 2 years ago, he scores 5 touchdowns in this offense. So if you give him those 5 touchdowns, right, the 2 more from last year to this year, he finished as a wide receiver 7 last year. So if we give him that little bit of a bump up, let's just say the receptions go from 90 to even 80, even if they drop because Tyler Higbee's good or Josh Reynolds takes on a little bit better of a role than what Brandon Cooks has been giving them. Let's just say these things happen, and you're looking at like an 80 catch for a 1,000-yard season out of Robert Woods, but he picks up 2 or 3 more touchdowns. It's going to be very similar to last year, where he clearly outproduced a 20th overall wide receiver off the board, and right now is my wide receiver 12. I do indeed like that. Here's what the Rams did in the offseason, as you can see on the screen. Nothing in free agency. Nothing. Literally nothing in free agency to affect at least the offensive side of the ball. Now, they lost Brandon Cooks. That helps Robert Woods. They lost Todd Gurley. It's going to help the running backs more, but it'll also help Robert Woods if it's going to be taking a lot of targets away from somebody and not redistributing them to the running backs. It's yet to be seen. But then in the draft, they get Cam Akers. That'll be the biggest help for Todd Gurley being gone, I would assume. And Van Jefferson is likely to replace and also complement. He'll complement Josh Reynolds and probably replace Brandon Cooks to an extent. Second round pick that, Van Jefferson was one of the guys in the second round that I said, okay, he could have been a third round pick. And I didn't say that with a lot of guys. A lot of guys I saw, second round pick. Yeah, Michael Pittman, Denzel Mims, Laviska Shenault, right? These guys should have been first round picks. T. Higgins and any other draft. But when you look at Van Jefferson, he's like a third round pick or a true second round pick. Nothing crazy special in my opinion. You have a bunch of tight ends out there. They draft Bryson Hopkins. You have Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. So there is going to still be target competition. As you can see right here, the target competition is Cooper Kupp, Higbee, Gerald Everett, Josh Reynolds, Van Jefferson. Probably in that order, depending on how much 12 personnel they go. You can flip-flop and debate about Josh Reynolds and Gerald Everett all you want. I think that's fine. But for me, the number one receiver in this offense, who's going to command the most targets, probably somewhere around, I'm going to project him right now. I have him for 129 targets. So I have him dropping 11 targets this year, but that's nothing major. That's just a little bit of natural regression. I also have him scoring 5 touchdowns, which kind of balances out what he did. Hard not to like that. I know Tyler Higbee's been exploding, or at least towards the end of last year. I will caution you though, when Gerald Everett was healthy, Tyler Higbee was exactly what he was for the first couple of years of his career. Just kind of a guy who popped up here and there, but kind of a nobody. Never really had the athleticism. So even though I like what Tyler Higbee did towards the end of last year, I'm also conscious of he was on a heater. Gerald Everett, the other tight end, was injured in this offense, and Gerald Everett was the tight end 1 before getting injured. So it's hard to tell what they're going to do. If they keep feeding Tyler Higbee as if he's Rob Gronkowski, even though he doesn't have that type of a build and same type of athleticism and after the catch ability as Gronk. So I'm a little bit cautious there. But if indeed Tyler Higbee isn't as great as everybody expects, it can only help Robert Woods if he's more of the go-to in this offense. And I've mentioned it a bunch before, but the 12 personnel keeps Robert Woods on the field a lot more rather than his teammate Cooper Kupp. The last 3 games of the season, last 4 games really, when they went to 12 personnel, 88% of the snaps, 97%, 93, and 93.5%. Whereas Cooper Kupp some of those weeks was playing in the 70s and 60% because, like I said earlier, Kupp's a mainly slot receiver. So sometimes, and a lot last year, he just started coming off the field. And you really saw Robert Woods being a consistent weapon for them last year. This is week 10 on from last year. 16.5 fantasy points, 15.7 fantasy points, 30.2, 25.7. Then he drops a stinker at 5.7%. He only catches 4 balls for, I believe, 17 yards that week. So not great, but then 20.3 and 20.6. He finished as a top 20 wide receiver in every single one of those weeks, except the one where he scores 5.7 fantasy points. He finishes as a top 10 wide receiver in 4 of those weeks. In 4 of those 7 weeks, he's finishing top 10. In 6 of those 7, he's finishing as top 20. That is what you get. That is a consistent wide receiver. That's what you're drafting as the wide receiver 18. I'm currently taking him ahead of that. I'm getting a lot of Robert Woods as my wide receiver 1 or even wide receiver 2 on some of my teams. And I would highly recommend that you draft him as well because he's a bust-proof player for me. So those are my 3 main bust-proof players. Obviously, I can name a ton more. Again, if you want my rankings, you can see where I'm ahead of a lot of ADP on, just based on my rankings alone, top 150s. Those are all down below in the Supreme Draft Guide. Check it out. But right now, my three main ones from this video are going to be Jarvis Landry, Robert Woods, and Matthew Stafford. Two honorable mentions that I have for you that I'll quickly just say. Allen Robinson's currently going off the board as a 29th overall player. I think it's fair. I have him as my wide receiver 8. I'm debating on putting him up to like wide receiver 6. He's currently going as wide receiver 9. I think he's bust proof based on just what he's done in the past. His entire career, dating back to college with Christian Hackenberg, all he's done is played with horrendous quarterbacks, right? When he was in Jacksonville with Blake Bortles, since he's been in the Bears with Mitch Trubisky. So even if Trubisky plays a lot this year and it's not Nick Foles, he's going to be fine because that's what Allen Robinson does. He's a stud who plays through bad quarterback play. But if Nick Foles comes in, who's by no means a world beater, but I would say better than Mitch Trubisky and at least will unleash it downfield a little bit more accurately, that only helps Allen Robinson. And then Jamison Crowder. So he's currently going as wide receiver 41. He's my wide receiver 37, so I'm higher than consensus. Going off the board is 109th pick. To me, Crowder's just a shoo-in for like 115 target, 120 target season. You know that Sam Darnold, dating back to college when he had Juju, loves throwing to the slot. You saw that. It was proven last year for Crowder, having a ton of targets and receptions. He's never going to get you a ton of downfield targets. So like last year, I think he started the season with like a 13 reception game for 99 yards. Like that's unheard of. Who does that, right? But that's what's going to happen. He's just going to be consistent, which means it's hard for him to bust if he stays healthy. It's hard for him to break out and really win you leagues like I think Jarvis Landry and Robert Woods and Matthew Stafford can. That's why they're not our honorable mentions or actual deep dives, but I think that Jamison Crowder is at least worth a mention. So I appreciate you all tuning into this video. I had a ton of fun breaking this down. I appreciate that a lot of more people are seeing these videos, so please do, before you go, hit the like button and the subscribe button. It goes a long way. And if you want to get into a $50 giveaway, if you're still listening on the iTunes platform, only like 2 or 3 people are reviewing it this past week. $50 to one person who reviews my podcast version. So if you're listening on the podcast, be sure to do that. If you're listening just on YouTube and you want to go over there, the Sal Vetri Show on iTunes only, leave a 5-star review, say something nice. It literally takes 30 to 60 seconds and you have a pretty good shot at winning $50. So be sure to do that. Hit like and subscribe before you go. My name is Sal. Go get the Supreme Draft Guide for just $10 and I'll see you all in the next one.